What's going wrong at Peloton, and why do I think it is kind of the BlackBerry of connected fitness?
Hey, Tyler, this is we're setting records here. I'm just hanging out nonstop. So listen, I think that what's important is that Peloton, the product, Peloton, the community, that hasn't changed, right? The value that they offer is still very much there. And we both know I'm a user and like that. I think the problem, though, is what also hasn't changed is the fact that this was a pull forward of demand that was interpreted internally as an expansion of an audience. And I think what we're seeing, buying Peloton out, buying Precor, Tonic, opening up Peloton Outward Park, there was a lot of investment that was spent in solving the capacity issue when there was a supply-demand mismatch back in the pandemic. The problem is right now there's a supply-demand mismatch in the other direction. And we know as of the last quarter, this isn't an unknown, this isn't a new fact, we know there was a massive build of inventory. They built $1.3 billion almost of inventory as demand was faltering. And so this notion of halting demand, I mean, that was really interesting. But this idea that there was excess demand, they had to promote to try to move units, that's something that we've known, and now we're seeing a response.
But if you've got that kind of inventory build, and you're seeing maybe slowing demand, why would the company be adding fees for delivery and setup and basically raising the price? It seems like they would have to go in the other direction to clear inventory and bring in more revenue.
So listen, you brought up Lauren's been busy this week. I've seen a lot of articles out of CNBC talking about hiring McKinsey, talking about raising prices, now talking about halting production. What it increasingly feels like is this is a company that has pivoted from growth to trying to fix to a cost restructuring. We've seen this countless times. It normally doesn't happen this quickly. So I think we saw this massively protracted expansion, and now we're seeing it on the flip side back down. So all these answers, listen, if you internally believe you're now going to sell fewer units, it's the right decision to say, let me try to get as much margin as I can, because what we also saw, and we didn't talk about this last week, but the margin on equipment has dropped precipitously as they've tried to get that new sale. I think Lauren had a very interesting point in the article today that I think with the internal message, and from what I read, was that price sensitivity and increased competition. Connected fitness as a sector is in its infancy. There's a lot of room. This is a great category, but we're finding there's a lot of players. And I think when Peloton started, they believed that the audience that they saw was equivalent to the opportunity that they had. No company in the history of time facing a consumer gets 100% of their audience, and it feels like they built their inventory as if they would.
And Simeon, it's Kelly. I know that we're kind of talking about this live as it's all playing out, but do you do a massive reset on the stock now? What's the price target? Is it still a sell?
So listen, I'm going to answer to the extent that I can right now, because obviously you said it, this is real time. I think what we need to account for is the conversations up until now have been, well, if Peloton has X number of subscribers, it doesn't matter what the equipment does. What we do probably have to ask ourselves is if there's a massive faltering of demand. So if we're seeing new customers slow down, the one conversation that really hasn't come up in any of my conversations in earnest that probably will at some point soon is what about the existing customers? That word churn has effectively disappeared from the last 2 years' vocabulary. But at some point, this is still a fitness player, right? We've talked about Planet Fitness a lot on the program. Great business, right. Very high churn, and very successful business. But the reality is fitness has a lower engagement than other things.
In other words,
so I think that.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, it sounds like what you're saying is if we now start to hear about existing customers churning because of the reopening, basically, then that could be another leg lower.
And to be clear, I'm not saying there are, but I think it's hard to imagine that won't happen. So I think right now we're entertaining the conversation. You're asking a question, is this a stock reset based on the fact that, okay, we're going to stop, we're going to recalibrate what we think Peloton will become for the future in terms of new people. But no one's talking about what about the existing base. We're taking for granted that that's a stable number. And I think that that's something that needs to be questioned.